Night had fallen like a heavy curtain. The village lay in silence, suffocating under a darkness not just of sky, but of spirit. Gone were the songs that once rose from its heart. Gone were the footsteps of the faithful on their way to Massachusetts. In the center of town, where sacred bells had once rung out across the fields, now stood a church silent, broken, desecrated. Its doors hung ajar, twisted by violence. The altar was no longer adorned with candles or flowers, but stripped bare. The tabernacle had been torn open. The priest, beloved by the village, dragged away in chains by soldiers who spat on the sacred and laughed at the holy. And in their fury, they had done the unthinkable. They had cast the consecrated hosts, the very body of Christ, onto the cold stone floor. Some hosts had been crushed beneath boots. Others had been flung aside like dust. No one dared step forward. Not when it happened. Not after. The people saw it all from behind closed windows, eyes wide with fear, their hands shaking at their sides. In that moment, the heart of their village had been pierced. And no one, it seemed, had the courage to mend it. No one, except a child. A whisper in the dark. She was barely more than a shadow, a whisper of movement in the night. Small feet against a dirt road. A tattered cloak pulled tightly around her. Her name is forgotten by history, lost to silence and time. But in heaven, she is known as Lee. She had seen the soldiers drag father away. She had heard the shouts, the blasphemies, the crash of statues falling to the ground. She had seen the hosts, the Eucharist, scattered and left behind. But to Lee, those white, circular pieces on the floor were not just broken bread. They were him. They were Jesus. Not a symbol, not a memory, not an idea, but the living God. So that night, after her village had gone to sleep, after the wind had settled and even the birds had grown still, Lee stepped quietly out of her home. Her heart was beating fast, but not from fear. She walked toward the shattered church, her eyes wide, her breath steady. And when she crossed the threshold of that once holy space, her little heart knew exactly what to do. The wounded sanctuary. The church smelled of dust and smoke. The crucifix hung crooked above the altar, its wooden Christ battered and scarred. The statues of Mary and the saints were broken, some faces missing, some limbs torn away. Candles that once burned with devotion now lay shattered, wax hardened across the floor like frozen tears. But it was the tabernacle that broke her most. It stood open and empty, except for the sacred hosts. Some whole, some crushed, all forgotten. She knelt, her knees pressed to the cold stone, her tiny hands folded before her chest. Her lips moved with trembling words. Jesus, I'm here. I love you. I won't leave you alone. That night she did not take a host. She only wept. She prayed. And then she left, unnoticed. But it would not be the last time she came. Faith in the shadow of fear. To understand what Lee did, we must understand what she risked. This was China, a time of violent persecution. The regime viewed religion as poison. Churches were shuttered or destroyed. Priests arrested. Sacred vessels smashed. To even be caught with a rosary or a crucifix was a threat to one's life. Masses were held in secret, whispered beneath the ground or hidden in woods. Families prayed behind locked doors, never knowing who might be listening through the walls. Fear had become a form of survival. And yet, somehow, this little girl had a faith that refused to hide. Each evening, after pretending to sleep, she would rise quietly, wrap her small frame in her cloak, and slip into the darkness. Her parents, exhausted and worried, never knew. Or perhaps, over time, they suspected, and let her go anyway, because even they could see something had taken root in her, a kind of holy fire that would not burn out. One host at a time. Lee did not rush. She had been taught well by her priest before he was taken. The Eucharist was not to be treated casually. It was holy, divine. It was him. To consume many hosts at once, scattered and dirted though they were, would be irreverent. So she made a quiet vow. Each night she would enter the church. She would kneel before the desecrated floor. She would whisper her prayers. and she would receive just one host, one act of love, one act of reverence, one sacred moment, and she would leave, then return the next night, and the next, until none remained. Heaven watches in silence. No one saw her, not at first, but heaven did. Every step she took toward that ruined church was like incense rising to the throne of God. Every whispered prayer echoed through eternity. Every host received was a symphony of silent adoration. The village began to notice, quietly, suspiciously, that the little girl often slipped out at night. Some thought her foolish. Others whispered that she was courting danger. But no one stopped her. Perhaps they were afraid. Perhaps they were ashamed. Or perhaps they saw in her a courage that both convicted and inspired. Love stronger than fear. It was not easy. The nights grew colder. Sometimes snow would fall. Sometimes the wind howled so loud that it seemed like the earth itself was groaning. Soldiers patrolled more often now. Rumors had begun to spread of someone entering the church. Doors were watched more carefully. Footsteps on the road were followed. Still Lee went. She never missed a night, even when her legs ached, even when her fear made her hands tremble, even when her heart whispered, "You don't have to do this," because love answered back, "Yes, you do." And so, quietly, reverently, she adored him, the tabernacle of her heart. To the world, she was just a child. To heaven, she was a tabernacle, a dwelling place of the living God. Each time she placed the host on her tongue, her whole body trembled, not from fear, but from awe. She would press her hands to her chest and whisper, "Thank you, Jesus. I believe. I love you. I will not let you be forgotten." That ruined church became holy ground again. Not because the walls were restored, or because the priest had returned, or because the soldiers had repented, but because a little girl dared to bring love back to the altar. One host at a time, a hidden war. What the world saw as superstition, Lee knew to be sacred mystery. What soldiers thought they could trample, she treated with trembling reverence. Each visit was not just an act of devotion. It was a battle, not fought with weapons, but with faith, love, presence. Each host she consumed was a silent proclamation. He is still here. He is not defeated. And he is not alone. The soldiers had desecrated a sanctuary, but God had consecrated a child. The final nights, the visits continued, night after night, and slowly the number of hosts diminished. She never hurried, never wavered. The end was near. Her mission was nearly complete. And yet, as the final days came, the danger increased. Patrols thickened. Suspicion mounted. The soldiers began watching the roads. Lanterns lit at night. Orders given to catch the one who dared to return to the forbidden church. Still, she went. Her feet now knew the path by heart. And so did her soul. Because love doesn't retreat when threatened. Love goes further. Love endures. Love kneels even when it knows it may not rise again. The cold air hung heavy over the village that night, as if the very sky had chosen to mourn. The moon, usually her quiet companion, was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world into a darkness so dense it felt as though time itself had stopped breathing. Inside her home, Lee lay still beneath a thin blanket, eyes open, watching the wooden beams above her. Her breath was steady, her thoughts calm. The world outside may have been quiet, but within her heart burned a flame, a mission not yet finished. She rose, careful not to wake her family. The floor creaked gently beneath her feet. She wrapped her threadbare cloak around her shoulders, tied it tightly under her chin, and opened the door into the night. The wind met her with a whisper, cold and sharp. But love was stronger. The path only she walked. She had walked this path so many times before. Her bare feet now knew every stone, every bend, every shadow. It was a silent pilgrimage, one of love, of reverence, of defiance. And tonight, she knew, would be one of her last. Only a few hosts remained. Soon, her beloved Jesus would no longer be lying abandoned on the desecrated floor of the church. Soon, he would no longer be alone. And still, she felt no pride in that. No relief, only purpose. Her journey was never about accomplishment. It was about adoration, a silent reunion. The church loomed in the darkness like a ghost from a forgotten world. Its broken windows stared blankly into the night. The doors, once majestic and carved with images of saints, now splintered and crooked, creaked in the wind. She stepped through the opening with familiarity, reverently, carefully, like one entering a king's palace, even if the world saw only ruins. The stone beneath her feet was cold. The air inside smelled of mildew and old wax. Dust hung in the beams of faint moonlight. But there they were, still, the hosts, not as many now, just a few, scattered like forgotten pearls across the floor. Her heart swelled. She knelt slowly, folding her hands with practiced care. Her small frame bowed low before the one she loved. She didn't need to speak. The silence was enough. Her presence was her prayer. She lowered herself and picked up one sacred host. She placed it gently on her tongue and closed her eyes. "Jesus," she whispered inwardly, "I am with you. I will not let you be forgotten, watched by heaven and by shadows." But she was not alone. Not tonight. Unbeknownst to her, the soldiers had begun their own watch. Footprints, whispered rumors, a flicker of movement in the night. It had all reached their ears. And now they waited, watching, some from a distance, one hidden behind the church wall, barely daring to breathe. They expected a priest, or a rebel, or perhaps a group of secret believers gathering to plot. But what they saw defied logic. A child kneeling on a ruined altar, a child who did not tremble, a child who consumed what they thought was just bread, but who treated it as the most sacred treasure in the world. They did not understand. But what they saw unsettled them. The interruption. Lee stood slowly, her heart full of peace, ready to return home. But then, a sharp voice pierced the silence. "Stop!" She froze. The sound of boots on stone echoed like thunder in the sanctuary. Lantern light flooded through the open doors. Shadows danced wildly along the scarred walls as 3 soldiers burst into the church. Their eyes darted around the ruins, then locked onto her small figure. The youngest of them hesitated. The eldest barked, "You again!" She turned, slowly. Her face was pale but calm. They advanced. "You were warned," one growled. "No one enters this place." She said nothing at first. Then, in a voice so small it barely carried, but filled with a strength none of them understood, she spoke. "Because he is here." The confession of a child. The words silenced them for a moment. They weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. They weren't political. But they cut through the air like a sword. One of the soldiers, clearly the leader, snarled, "Foolish girl. This place is nothing." She didn't flinch. "He is still here," she said softly. "He is still waiting. I will not leave him." They looked at one another, unsettled. For a moment, the air thickened with hesitation. But hate is often louder than conviction. Superstition. One spat. "You'll learn your lesson." The butt of a rifle was raised. The final offering. She didn't run. She didn't scream. Instead, she bowed her head and whispered, "Jesus, I love you. I will never leave you." The first blow struck her side. Her body crumpled, but her spirit did not break. She crawled not away but forward, toward the remaining hosts. Blood from her lips stained the stone. Her hand reached out, trembling, toward the sacred fragments still left. Another blow landed, this one to her back. Still she moved. Still she reached. The soldiers shouted now, confused by her persistence, angered by her defiance, threatened by a child's love that would not surrender. Another strike, then another, until she no longer moved. She lay still, a small hand extended, fingers just inches from the final host. Her body broken, but her mission complete. The morning after, dawn rose over the village with a silence that felt sacred. It was the baker's wife who first noticed something was wrong. Then a shepherd boy saw soldiers leaving the church, hurriedly with haunted eyes. Whispers began to spread. And by mid-morning, the villagers gathered at the threshold of the sanctuary, staring at the ruin that had become strangely familiar. They didn't expect to find her, but they did. Lee's body lay still on the floor. Her face bore bruises, but also a faint smile. Her hands, though battered, were folded. And beside her, untouched, lay the final Eucharistic host, the weeping of the village. The people fell to their knees. Some wept openly, others silently. Men who had once feared to enter the church now bowed their heads in shame. Women reached for rosaries they hadn't dared to hold in weeks. Children stared in wonder at the little girl they had once ignored. No one spoke, but in their silence, a sacred truth rose among them. This child had done what none of them had dared. She had loved, fully, without fear, without pause. And now, she had died for that love. A martyr with no name. There was no canonization, no papal declaration, no feast day, no funeral procession with cardinals in red. She was buried in a simple grave beneath a simple stone, marked only by a small wooden cross, placed there by trembling hands. But something had shifted, something holy. Her death was not just a tragedy. It was a witness, echoes in the shadows. In the days that followed, people spoke in hushed tones. She died for Jesus. She gave her life for the Eucharist. She saw what we didn't. In secret masses, the priests told her story. At bedtime, parents whispered it to their children. And the villagers, once silent, once afraid, found a new strength. Because courage is contagious. And love, when offered without condition, plants seeds that even persecution cannot bury. The host remains. The final host, left untouched beside her, was eventually retrieved by a priest in hiding. It was placed reverently in a small tabernacle hidden beneath a barn outside the village. And for many years afterward, villagers would visit that barn quietly, in pairs or alone, not to see the priest, not even for confession, but to kneel, to remember, to honor the one she loved, and the girl who would not abandon him. A question for the soul. Her story spread slowly at first, then further than anyone imagined. Missionaries heard it. Writers carried it across seas. Some dismissed it as legend. Others clung to it as truth. But those who knew, those who had seen her, heard her, walked past her at dawn, knew it was no myth. She was real. And her question remains. If a child could risk everything for him, what am I willing to do? The years passed. The grave where she was buried slowly became overgrown. The wooden cross that once marked it leaned, weathered by wind and rain. Her name, never written in stone, faded into silence. Governments changed. Villages rebuilt. Persecutions rose and fell like the tides of history. And yet, quietly, persistently, her story refused to vanish. She had no statue, no canonization, no miracles attributed to her name. But her witness? It would become a seed planted in hearts across the world. Because what Lee did could not be forgotten. Not by those who saw her, and certainly not by heaven. The memory that would not die. At first, only a few spoke of her. Old women with cracked rosaries, lighting candles in secret. Young men who had seen her face bruised yet peaceful. Parents who tucked their children into bed and whispered. There was a girl who saw Jesus in the Eucharist. She walked through danger. She knelt in silence. And she gave her life, just so he wouldn't be alone. The story spread like smoke through the cracks of the underground church. Not through books, not through homilies, but through reverence, through tears, through trembling voices who believed. A legacy in silence. Lee didn't preach a single sermon. She didn't write a journal. She never asked for attention or honor. She simply believed. And that belief, quiet, pure, and uncompromising, became a living homily more powerful than 1,000 words. Even the authorities could not erase it. They had tried to silence her with violence. But love like hers cannot be killed. It only grows stronger. Even now, the power of a child's love. Her witness speaks to something we rarely talk about. That courage doesn't always look like loud resistance. That heroism doesn't always wear a collar or command a pulpit. Sometimes it kneels, in silence. Sometimes it is small and fragile. Sometimes it looks like a little girl with cracked lips and bare feet, clutching a torn cloak against the night air as she walks toward a desecrated church. Lee didn't set out to change the world. She only wanted to love him. That was enough. Heaven took note. Though the world gave her no recognition, heaven wrote her name in gold. Her blood soaked the floor of a ruined sanctuary. Her soul entered eternity with one last whisper of adoration. And all of heaven stood, not because of her fame, but because of her faithfulness. And isn't that what holiness truly is? Not the applause of crowds, but the quiet yes whispered in secret when no one is watching. A lamp in the tabernacle. Today, in churches around the world, there's a small red lamp that burns beside the tabernacle. It flickers quietly, often unnoticed, but it means something profound. It means he is here. He is waiting, still, just as he was waiting in that ruined church, just as Lee found him, just as we can find him too. And when we kneel before the Eucharist, before the one who hides himself in fragile bread, we kneel not just with our own hearts, but with hers. Her story is our invitation. We live in a world where faith is often mocked, where the Eucharist is misunderstood, even by some who claim to believe, where reverence is rare, and love often grows cold. But Lee's story invites us to return, not just to the church building, but to adoration, to wonder, to the mystery of the Eucharist that is not a thing but a person, alive, waiting, loving, a mirror for the soul. Her question still echoes today. If I could kneel night after night, alone in danger, if I could give everything for him, would you? That is the challenge her story places before us. Not one of guilt, but of awakening, of remembering what we've forgotten. That Jesus, truly present in the Eucharist, is not an abstract idea. He is not a symbol. He is not a metaphor. He is there, and he waits for you, just as he waited for her. The forgotten girl, remembered by heaven. No historian recorded her full name. No photograph captured her face. No formal document traced her life. But her soul is etched into eternity. And today we remember her, not because she was great in the eyes of the world, but because she was great in the eyes of God. Heaven's martyr. In a world obsessed with recognition, Lee's life reminds us, you don't need to be famous to be faithful. You don't need a platform to make an impact. You don't need applause to be holy. All you need is love. Real love. Eucharistic love. Love that sees Jesus not just in heaven but in the host. Your turn. Lee's mission is not finished. She adored him in her time. She kept him company when others ran. She gave everything. But now, it is our turn. To believe. To kneel. To return to reverence. To whisper in the stillness of our hearts. Jesus, I love you. I believe in you. I will not let you be forgotten. The invitation still stands. Tonight, maybe you will walk past a church. Maybe the sanctuary lamp will flicker softly through the window. Maybe you'll remember this story. The forgotten girl, her bare feet, her trembling hands, her quiet adoration. And maybe, just maybe, you'll feel that gentle tug in your soul. That invitation. To come in. To kneel. To love him. One last word. When we kneel before the Eucharist, we kneel beside her. When we whisper, I believe, our voice joins hers. And when we choose love over fear, adoration over apathy, reverence over routine, her witness lives on. She may be forgotten by the world, but not by us, and never by heaven, because she was the forgotten girl who saw Jesus in the Eucharist. And through her now we see him too,